there have been demands for caste census for decades, especially in the context of OBC quotas. The only occasion where India did a kind of caste census was in 1931 census. So from then onwards, governments have been using those numbers and extrapolating them and coming to some kind of understanding. When the Mandal Commission report was to be implemented in 1990, one of the main criticism was that how could you use data that was almost 6 decades old, and unless you collected data, how would you know who is backward and who is not? So with regard to OBC reservations, every time there is a controversy, there is a demand for caste-based reservations. I think what it basically means is, let us count people according to castes. As of now, we are collecting only for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. There also, we are only asking, do you belong to a scheduled caste? Within scheduled caste, there are 100 castes, hundreds of castes. There are hundreds of tribes, but we are not going to that level. What it means by caste-based census, as far as I am concerned, and my understanding is, we are going to ask, what is your caste? We are not going to say, do you belong to OBC caste? Hereafter, probably we will be collecting caste data, not just for SC, ST and OBC, but everybody. That's my understanding.
Actually, there's a lot of confusion in the debate around caste and caste census today, because there is not just one, but multiple debates that are conflating against one another. There is the question of, what is the caste census? What was that exercise conducted in 2011 for, if the data was never released? But there's a bit of misunderstanding about what it was, because the SECC was only about rural India and did not include urban India. So it was not actually an exhaustive caste census. There is also the question of the government giving constitutional status to the National Commission for Backward Classes. So that also sort of reinitiated, relaunched the debate around caste. There is a debate about the opportunity to maintain the 50% cap of reservation, a cap that has been, also enforced by quashing the demand of Marathas of having reservation in Maharashtra. There is the government's decision to restore a state list, which had been briefly for a period of 2 months suppressed by the same Maharashtra court decision. And then the overall demand of the caste census. So all these 5 questions have their own degree of, technicality, and the public conversation typically would sort of, mash up, all those questions at once. So on the caste census, there is a consensus among parties in power, and particularly the BJP, that no one really wants a caste census among political parties, except regional parties who think that they may stand to gain from it. Historically, it's been a political time bomb to release new caste data because it unleashes political consequences that no one can control, right? BJP government in UP have played with the state list in the early 2000s. Rajnath Singh lost his seat pretty quickly. VP Singh obviously famously announced the implementation of the Mandal Commission report and was ousted of power rather unceremoniously in the following election. There are examples also from Rajasthan and so forth. So it's basically political poison for parties in power to actually touch to these, really sensitive question of caste census, which makes me think that we're not going to have a caste census at all. We may debate about this as long as we want, but this is not going to make it happen because of the political uncertainty attached to it. Now, on the other hand, there is an argument to be made that we actually need good data if we are going to have social welfare system based on caste-based targeting.
Absolutely. If you look at Article 340, which is the basis for OBC reservations, it talks about classes, not castes. And according to that article, we should be even looking into the so-called upper castes. If there are any classes among them that are backward, in need of state support. And even if you take only OBCs, that is the Shudra communities, backwardness I would see in 3 dimensions. One is between caste, between jatis, let us say. The second is between regions. For example, a caste in, say, Western Uttar Pradesh, which is a very fertile land, could be very advanced and wealthy. And the same caste people in other parts of, say, in Rajasthan, may be backward. The third is gender. When you look at a particular caste and say that they are educationally backward. But if you look into the data gender-wise, probably it is more related to the fact that that particular community does not encourage daughters to go to school. That would bring down the overall educational attainments of that particular community. And similarly, there could be, say, upper castes in very poorer regions who could be legitimately called educationally backward. To decide all these matters, you must have a caste census. And, though you rightly said, we may not have them. But as long as there are demands for OBC reservations, you can't avoid demand for caste census. Something it is brewing in Maharashtra now. Many smaller communities say that it's not Marathas, but there are so many smaller OBC communities in need of quotas.
Exactly. And it's worth remembering that the determination of backwardness are not solely in the existing system is not solely based on caste, but also on economic criteria. And previous backward classes commission, the Kalelka Commission in the 50s, the Mandel Commission in the 80s, and so forth, have basically come up with criteria of backwardness that also included the overall economic status of particular groups. And today, not only has there been a lot of variations in the trajectory between those groups, some of those backward groups are now the established elites in states where they have also risen socially, economically, and politically. Think about the Yadavs in UP, or today even the Kurmis in UP, or even the Lord, which were very backward caste and now have been empowered politically. Through their own assertion and through their inclusion also into the BJP fold. And so we need the right data to assert also what's been the trajectories of various OBC groups within that category. But the debate is also complicated by the growth of intra-caste variations, right? The claim for quotas for Marathas or Jats or Patidas in Gujarat is not just based on a certain definition of caste identity, but on the realization that there are segments of those castes that are not doing as well as the whole group is perceived to be doing, right? And so they are also claiming a slice of the pie for themselves.
Gilles, you rightly said, most of the groups you mentioned, sociologically, they happen to be dominant castes. And they wield political power. In their respective states, most chief ministers come from these communities. And they also claim backward class status. You are right, it's not the entire community. Unless government targets those backward groups within that particular, maybe Marathas or Patidars, it cannot be anybody's case that there are no backward people among those communities. But the challenge is how you are going to target them. And how can you target without having some numbers? So the proper census where you collect literacy, urban, rural, male, female, workforce participation, household amenities, these are needed. The exercise they carried out in 2011 and 12, social and economic caste census, it is neither here nor there. So those kind of piecemeal measures are what Karnataka did. May not really work. If at all we are going to have caste census, let us have caste census for everybody.
Yeah.
Probably this is the time even to add religion.
No, absolutely. And the Karnataka example actually illustrates very well the problem that arises when there's even a suspicion of, conducting those enumeration exercises as a partisan exercise, right? So the government of Karnataka, for a variety of reasons, including electoral, conducted that exercise. And when they figure out that the results were not going in the direction that they wanted, they got cold feet and did not release the data. So not only do we need a caste census, but we need a caste census or a form of enumeration which is conducted by an administrative authority in a non-partisan way.
Yes.
What I'm struck is that among those who ask for census, they're all expecting political leadership to sort of decree it, altogether. But I don't hear a lot of voices calling for the establishment of a new backward classes commission, which normally should be the way to go, to do that in a rather technocratic manner, scientific manner, fairly dispassionate manner. That seems to be the best way to go about enumerating caste, but I don't see that demand emerging, even from the parties who are currently asking for the census.
No, but that option we have lost forever, Gilles. 2 amendments the central government brought about, 102 Constitution Amendment Act 2018, which created the NCBC, National Commission for the Backward Classes. It is not created under Article 340.
That's right.
The earlier commissions were under 340. Now, this commission was created under Article 338B. It's a replica of 338 and 338A. They are meant for the SC/STs. Mm-hmm. Now, we are equating OBCs with SC/STs in this article. Now, similarly, in the current amendment we are talking now, 127 amendment, it has created 342A. So, it is not going to be an administrative or a scientific investigation to measure backwardness and decide who is backward and who is not backward. This has become now political.
Yeah,
so sorry. So as long as 342A stands, the scrutiny of the judiciary, neither the central government nor state governments have no reason to appoint a commission to decide these matters. They can simply declare any caste or a part of a caste as a backward class.
Yeah, and this is something, there's an old practice, of doing that, to change caste status ahead of an election. It's been practically, a regional sport in UP, and it's been, the practice also in many other states.
Yeah.
So while the core decision to give back state power to establish their own list was warranted because they were rather arbitrarily deprived of it 2 months ago, there's no reflection also about, within which sort of administrative framework should that listing exercise be done. And it's easy to understand why political leadership would want to retain control, because then they can use that as a tool for political mobilizations or electoral strategy. And that's the worst. That's one of the worst possible outcomes.
Gilles, this caste is a zero-sum game. A party may gain the support of a few communities, but at the same time it would lose also. Mm-hmm. So as of now, this is a kind of blank check to everybody as a promise, but it is unlikely to be honored tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Now, to call the bluff of the political class, you need to have a caste census to figure out. Once you have caste census, it cannot be arbitrarily decided who is backward and who is not. Mm-hmm. It's a good way of even including upper caste in this. We travel in rural areas. We meet Dalits, we meet upper caste. Sometimes we can't distinguish between them. Mm-hmm. The social and educational backwardness probably more or less the same. So Article 340 never meant for only Shudras. That's the reason it talked about classes. Now, the perversion that took place for the past 70 years is, we defined this to mean that backward classes among Shudras. That division was not there. If you read the plain reading of Article 340, it doesn't make any distinction. Now that article has been killed. The consequences of these moves, whether it's OBC reservations, the caste census, and all this, we have a social problem. We need to address that at social level, maybe through some administrative measures, but we made it a political process. The nation is going to pay a price for that.
So there are a lot of people in India, and particularly in urban India, who would wish caste, to go away. And we seem to think that the way of doing that is, to ignore caste altogether. So erase caste from public records, erase caste from the public gaze, and sort of caste-based problem would go away. You and I know, and those who are in touch with, the reality, the everyday realities of caste know that it does not work that way. So turning a blind eye on, the complex issue of measuring backwardness among backward classes and beyond is not something that can be done in absence of data. And actually, India already collects a lot of data on a variety of groups, right? On Dalits, on tribal populations, obviously on women. There's a religious segment in the census, which is also public. And so all we are asking is to include other segments of the population as well. The economist Ashwini Deshpande very often says that India is the only country in the world to have an affirmative action program that targets a population that's not enumerated, that's not counted properly. Right, so that's an anomaly which could easily be fixed, but the political uncertainty linked to the very exercise of counting caste, the political sensitivity of it, and the advantage of keeping that as an arbitrary instrument of patronage under control of political parties and governments prevent, to my mind, any possibility of actually having a caste census anytime soon.
And we also need to counter this argument that if you do caste census, it would perpetuate caste system. We are talking about socially identifiable endogamous groups that survived hundreds and thousands of years when there were no census. So the idea that if you close your eyes, the reality would go away is devies any logic.